The sound of clinking glasses and forced laughter filled our parents' suburban Chicago home as I stood in the corner of the living room, watching my family celebrate Marcus's latest promotion. Again. My older brother, all 6 feet of him in his perfectly pressed navy suit, was holding court near the fireplace, regaling everyone with stories about his new role as senior vice president at Hartwell & Associates, one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the Midwest. You know, Marcus has always been the smart one in the family, Dad announced loudly, his voice carrying over the chatter as he raised his whiskey glass. Ever since he was little, we knew he'd go places. MBA from Northwestern, climbing the corporate ladder like it's nothing. That's my boy. I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. There I was, 25 years old, standing in the same living room where I'd heard variations of this speech my entire life. The same living room where my achievements had been met with polite nods and quick subject changes. Where my app development company's success was dismissed as playing around with computers, and my investment portfolio was seen as lucky gambling. Mom beamed at Marcus from across the room, her eyes practically sparkling with pride. "We're so proud of you, honey. Senior VP at 28, can you believe it?" Marcus soaked it all in, that familiar, confident smile spreading across his face. "Well, you know, the company recognized my leadership potential. They're trusting me with some of their biggest clients now. The Peterson account alone is worth $12 million annually." I took a sip of my wine, trying to keep my expression neutral. $12 million. That was cute. Last month, one of my apps had generated $15 million in revenue, but nobody in this room even knew about it. They saw my work as a hobby, something I did in my spare time while waiting for a real job to come along. "Nick, honey, you've been awfully quiet tonight," my Aunt Linda said, turning her attention to me. "How are things going with your computer stuff?" Computer stuff. I wanted to laugh, but instead, I managed a diplomatic smile. "Things are going well, Aunt Linda. I'm working on expanding my portfolio and exploring some new investment opportunities." Dad chuckled, not unkindly, but with that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise. "That's nice, sweetheart. But you know, maybe you should think about following Marcus's path. Get yourself a nice stable job at a good company. All this entrepreneur stuff is risky business. She could probably get an entry-level position somewhere," Mom added helpfully. "With Marcus's connections, I'm sure someone would give her a chance." Marcus nodded sagely, as if he were dispensing wisdom from on high. "I'd be happy to put in a good word for you, Nick. Hartwell's always looking for bright people, even if they don't have traditional business backgrounds. They might have something in their IT department. IT department. Like I was some college dropout who'd learned to code over the weekend. I'd been building applications since I was 16, had my first successful app in the App Store at 19, and had quietly built a tech empire while they were all focused on Marcus's corporate climb. "That's very generous of you, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I'm pretty committed to my current path." Of course," Dad said, waving his hand dismissively. "We just want what's best for you. Sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees when you're too close to something." The conversation moved on, but I remained frozen in place, my mind racing. Too close to something. As if I were some naive kid who didn't understand business. As if the company I'd built from nothing, the millions I'd quietly accumulated, the strategic investments I'd made across multiple sectors, were all just lucky accidents. I watched Marcus accept another round of congratulations, watched him bask in the admiration that should have been, at least partially, mine. But more than that, I watched my family's complete dismissal of everything I'd accomplished. It wasn't malicious. They genuinely believed they were looking out for me, but their ignorance stung more than outright cruelty would have. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself alone with my thoughts in the kitchen, loading dishes into the dishwasher. That's when I heard Dad talking to Marcus in the hallway. "You know, son, I worry about your sister sometimes. She's got her head in the clouds with all these pipe dreams. Thank God we've got you to keep the family grounded in reality." Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet precision of a lock clicking shut. I'd spent years trying to prove myself through accomplishments, through success, through building something meaningful, but they'd never see it. They'd never see me, unless I made them see me. That night, I went home to my downtown Chicago apartment and opened my laptop. I'd been tracking various acquisition opportunities for months, studying companies that might be good investments or potential competitors. But now I had a very different kind of target in mind, Hartwell and Associates. Marcus's precious company, the place where he was the rising star, the golden boy, the one everyone admired. I spent the next 3 hours researching everything I could find about Hartwell's financial situation, their ownership structure, their recent performance. What I discovered made me smile for the first time all evening. They were more vulnerable than they looked. The next morning, I sat in my favorite coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, surrounded by the familiar buzz of downtown Chicago. My laptop screen displayed financial documents, SEC filings, and market analysis reports about Hartwell and Associates. What I'd discovered the night before was even more interesting in the harsh light of day. Hartwell wasn't the unshakable corporate giant everyone believed it to be. Sure, they had impressive client lists and a sterling reputation, but their financial foundation was surprisingly shaky. They'd been hemorrhaging money on failed expansion attempts, and their aging founder, Richard Hartwell, was quietly looking for exit strategies. I pulled up my investment portfolio on my phone, doing some quick mental math. Between my app revenue, my cryptocurrency investments from 2019, and my diversified stock holdings, I had enough liquid assets to make a serious play. But I'd need more than money. I'd need strategy, connections, and most importantly, absolute secrecy. My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner and best friend, Sarah Chen. Coffee meeting still on for 10. I've got news about the Peterson Group deal. Sarah was one of the few people who truly understood the scope of my business ventures. We'd met at a tech conference 3 years ago, and she'd become both my closest confidant and my most trusted business advisor. If anyone could help me navigate this situation, it was her. When Sarah arrived, sliding into the seat across from me with her usual energy, I could see the excitement in her eyes. "You're going to love this," she said, pulling out her tablet. "The Peterson Group is ready to move forward with the acquisition. They want to buy TechFlow for $42 million. TechFlow was the app development company I'd built over the past 4 years. $42 million. It was more money than most people saw in a lifetime, and it would give me exactly the kind of financial firepower I needed for what I had in mind. That's incredible, Sarah," I said, genuinely pleased. "But I need to talk to you about something else. Something confidential." I turned my laptop screen toward her, showing her the Hartwell and Associates financial reports I'd been analyzing. "I want to buy this company." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Hartwell and Associates? Nick, that's a major consulting firm. Why would you want to get into that business?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Let's just say I have personal reasons for wanting to diversify into consulting, and their numbers show they're more vulnerable than they appear." For the next hour, I walked Sarah through my analysis. Hartwell had been losing key clients to newer, more agile competitors. Their overhead was astronomical, with prime real estate in downtown Chicago and a bloated management structure. Most critically, Richard Hartwell was 68 years old and had been quietly shopping the company to private equity firms for the past 6 months. "This is actually brilliant," Sarah said, studying the numbers. "They're overvalued in the market because of their reputation, but their fundamentals are weak. If you could acquire them at the right price and streamline operations—" "Exactly," I said. "But I need this to stay completely confidential. No one can know I'm behind this." Sarah nodded slowly. "We'll need to set up a holding company, probably offshore. Use intermediaries for all communications. It's doable, but it'll be complex." Over the next few days, Sarah and I worked around the clock to put the pieces in place. We established North Star Holdings, a Delaware corporation with myself as the sole shareholder, but with Sarah as the public face. We retained a top-tier Chicago law firm, Goldman & Associates, to handle the legal aspects of the acquisition. The Peterson Group deal closed on a Friday, putting $42 million in my business account. Combined with my other liquid assets, I now had enough capital to make a serious bid for Hartwell and Associates. But I needed more than money. I needed intelligence. I needed to understand exactly what was happening inside that company, what their weaknesses were, and how to exploit them. That's when I remembered Kevin Murphy. Kevin was an old college friend who'd graduated a year ahead of me and had been working at Hartwell for 3 years. We'd stayed in touch through LinkedIn and occasional coffee meetings, but I'd never thought much about his career until now. He was smart, ambitious, and most importantly, he'd always been a little frustrated with the politics at Hartwell. I called him that evening, suggesting we meet for drinks to catch up. We met at a trendy bar in River North, and after an hour of casual conversation, I carefully steered the topic toward his work. "How are things at Hartwell these days?" I asked, trying to sound merely curious. Kevin's expression darkened slightly. "Honestly, it's been better. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. Rumors about the old man wanting to sell, management changes, that kind of thing. Plus, some of the younger guys are getting promoted really fast while the rest of us are stuck in the same positions." "Younger guys like who?" "Well, your brother Marcus, for one. Don't get me wrong, he's talented, but he's only been there 2 years and he's already a senior VP. It's created some tension with people who've been there longer." This was better than I'd hoped. Internal politics, resentment, uncertainty about the future. All factors that could work in my favor. "That sounds frustrating," I said sympathetically. "Have you thought about looking elsewhere?" Kevin shrugged. I've considered it, but you know how it is. The devil you know versus the devil you don't. Plus, Hartwell still has a great reputation. It looks good on the resume. I filed this information away. Kevin could be useful, but I needed to be careful not to reveal too much too soon. By the end of the week, I had my strategy mapped out. Sarah had made initial contact with Richard Hartwell's representatives, expressing interest from a private investment group in acquiring the company. The initial response was cautious but not dismissive. Meanwhile, I'd been doing my own research on the key players at Hartwell. I studied their backgrounds, their strengths, their weaknesses. I learned about their client relationships, their internal dynamics, their growth plans, and most importantly, I learned everything I could about Marcus's role in the company, his client list, his responsibilities, his relationships with other executives. I needed to understand exactly what I'd be buying, and exactly what kind of position my dear brother would find himself in once I owned the company he worked for. As I sat in my apartment that Sunday evening looking out at the Chicago skyline, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was bigger than anything I'd ever attempted. It wasn't just about proving myself anymore, it was about fundamentally changing the power dynamic that had defined my family for my entire life. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Mom. "Hi, honey," she said warmly. "I just wanted to check in. You seemed a little quiet at Marcus's party last week." "I'm fine, Mom," I said. "Just busy with work." "That's good, dear. You know, I was thinking, maybe you should call Marcus and ask him about job opportunities at his company. He mentioned they might have some openings." I smiled to myself. "That's a great idea, Mom. I'll definitely give that some thought." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to Sarah. Tomorrow, we'd be making our formal offer to acquire Hartwell & Associates. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown Chicago skyscraper, surrounded by lawyers, accountants, and investment bankers. The view of Lake Michigan was spectacular, but I was too focused on the documents spread across the mahogany table to appreciate it. Richard Hartwell sat at the head of the table, a distinguished man in his late 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that had seen decades of corporate negotiations. Next to him was his lawyer, Patricia Goldman from Goldman & Associates. Ironically, the same firm Sarah and I had retained, though different partners were handling each side. "Missy Chen," Hartwell said, addressing Sarah, who was representing North Star Holdings, "your client's offer is certainly generous, but I have to ask, why the secrecy? In my 40 years in business, I've never dealt with an acquisition where the principal buyer refused to meet face-to-face." Sarah maintained her composure perfectly. "Mr. Hartwell, as I've explained, North Star Holdings represents a consortium of investors who prefer to maintain their privacy during the initial phases of acquisition. This is increasingly common in today's market, particularly with high-profile transactions." I watched the exchange from my position as Sarah's financial advisor, a role that gave me a front-row seat to the negotiations without revealing my true identity. I'd styled my hair differently, wore conservative business attire, and had even adopted a slight accent to further disguise myself. The last thing I needed was for word to get back to Marcus that his sister was lurking around his company's boardroom. Hartwell's chief financial officer, a nervous-looking man named David Chen, no relation to Sarah, spread out a series of financial projections. The company has shown steady growth over the past 5 years, with particular strength in our technology consulting division. We're projecting 15% growth next year. I bit back a smile. The projections were optimistic to the point of fantasy. Based on my analysis, Hartwell was facing serious headwinds in the coming quarters. 3 of their major clients were already shopping for new consulting partners, and their expensive downtown office lease was eating into profits. "These projections seem aggressive," Sarah said diplomatically, "given the current market conditions and your client retention rates." Hartwell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Ms. Chen, Hartwell & Associates has been serving Chicago's business community for over 3 decades. Our reputation speaks for itself." "Of course," Sarah replied smoothly. "That's precisely why our investors are interested. However, they're also pragmatic about market realities." The negotiations continued for hours, with both sides dancing around the real issues. Hartwell wanted $65 million for the company. We were offering $48 million, based on what I considered a fair valuation of their actual worth rather than their inflated reputation. During a break, I stepped onto the building's observation deck to get some air and clear my head. The October wind was sharp off the lake, and I pulled my coat tighter as I looked out over the city where I'd built my life and career. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hey sis, want to grab lunch this week? I've got some exciting news about a big project at work." I stared at the message, wondering what exciting news he was referring to. Was it connected to the acquisition talks? Did he know anything about what was happening in the executive suite? I texted back, "Sure, how about Thursday, that new place on State Street?" When I returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted. Hartwell was conferring quietly with his advisors, and I could see the stress lines around his eyes. Sarah caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod. We were making progress. "Mr. Hartwell," Sarah said once everyone was seated again, "perhaps we could discuss the transition timeline. Our investors are prepared to move quickly if we can reach an agreement on valuation." Hartwell straightened in his chair. "Ms. Chen, I have to be frank with you. This company is my life's work. I've built it from nothing into one of the most respected consulting firms in the Midwest. I want to ensure it goes to someone who understands its value and will preserve its legacy." There was real emotion in his voice, and for a moment I felt a twinge of guilt. But then I remembered my father's words from the party. Marcus has always been the smart one. The dismissive tone, the assumptions about my capabilities, the complete blindness to what I'd accomplished. "Mr. Hartwell," Sarah responded, "I can assure you that our investors have the deepest respect for what you've built here. They're not interested in dismantling your legacy. They want to help it grow and evolve for the next generation." It wasn't entirely a lie. I did respect what Hartwell had accomplished, and I had no intention of destroying the company, but I also had very specific plans for how it would be run under my ownership. The turning point came when Hartwell's CFO presented their latest quarterly numbers. They were worse than I'd expected. Revenue was down 12% from the previous year, and they'd lost 2 major clients in the past quarter alone. "Mr. Hartwell," Sarah said gently, "these numbers suggest some challenges that our earlier projections didn't account for." Hartwell's shoulders sagged slightly. "The market has been difficult lately. Some of our competitors have been undercutting us on price, and frankly, some of our clients are looking for younger, more dynamic approaches." There it was. The admission that confirmed everything I'd suspected. Hartwell and Associates was a respected brand built on past success, but it was struggling to adapt to a changing market. "What if we structured the deal differently?" I suggested, speaking up for the first time in hours. "A base purchase price of $52 million, with performance bonuses tied to client retention and revenue growth over the next 2 years?" Everyone turned to look at me. I'd been so quiet during the negotiations that they'd probably forgotten I was there. "That's actually not a bad idea," Hartwell said slowly. "It would give us incentive to ensure a smooth transition." Sarah picked up the thread seamlessly. "We could also include retention bonuses for key employees to ensure continuity of service." Over the next hour, we hammered out the details of the revised offer. $52 million up front, with potential bonuses that could bring the total to $58 million if certain performance targets were met. It was more than I'd originally wanted to pay, but it was still a fair price for what I was getting. More importantly, it included provisions that would give me significant control over the company's operations immediately upon closing. I would own Hartwell and Associates, lock, stock, and barrel. "I'll need to discuss this with my board," Hartwell said finally, "but I think we have the framework for a deal." As we filed out of the conference room, Sarah and I maintained our professional demeanor until we reached the elevator. Only when the doors closed did she allow herself a small smile. "That was masterful," she said quietly. "The way you structured that revised offer, it gives us everything we need while making them feel like they're getting a fair deal." "It is a fair deal," I said. "I'm not trying to cheat anyone. I just want to own something that's been held over my head my entire life." 2 days later, Hartwell called Sarah to accept our offer. The closing was scheduled for the following week, with all the usual due diligence and paperwork to be completed in the meantime. That Thursday, I met Marcus for lunch at the restaurant on State Street. He looked more excited than I'd seen him in months. "Nick, I have incredible news," he said after we'd ordered. "The company is being acquired by some investment group. They're keeping all the existing management, and they've actually indicated they want to expand the technology consulting division. This could be huge for my career." I took a sip of my water, keeping my expression neutral. "That sounds exciting. Do you know anything about the new owners?" "Not much," Marcus admitted. "They're being pretty secretive about it. Some holding company called North Star. But our senior partners seem optimistic about the transition." "I'm happy for you, Marcus," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want to destroy his career. I just wanted him, and the rest of my family, to see that I was capable of more than they'd ever imagined. "You know," Marcus said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "with the new ownership, there might be opportunities for you too. Maybe I could put in a good word, get you an interview for something in their IT department." I smiled. "That's very thoughtful of you, Marcus. Let me know how the transition goes." As we finished lunch, I wondered what his reaction would be when he learned the truth. Would he be angry? Impressed? Humiliated? I guess I'd find out soon enough. The closing was scheduled for Monday morning. In 4 days, I would own the company where Marcus worked, and everything would change. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp November air that made Chicago feel electric. I stood in my apartment bathroom, staring at my reflection as I prepared for the most important day of my professional life. In 3 hours, I would officially become the owner of Hartwell & Associates. In 4 hours, I would walk into that company as the new CEO and reveal myself to Marcus. My hands were surprisingly steady as I applied my makeup. I'd chosen a charcoal gray power suit, the kind of outfit that commanded respect in corporate boardrooms. My blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and I wore the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for my college graduation, a reminder of the women in my family who'd paved the way for moments like this. The closing took place at Goldman & Associates offices, in the same conference room where we'd negotiated the deal. This time, however, the atmosphere was purely procedural. Documents were signed, wire transfers were initiated, and handshakes were exchanged. By 10:30 a.m., I was the sole owner of one of Chicago's most established consulting firms. Richard Hartwell seemed genuinely emotional as he handed over the keys to the executive suite. "Ms. Chen," he said to Sarah, "please tell your principal that they're getting a good company with good people. I hope they'll treat it well." "I'm sure they will," Sarah replied, shooting me a meaningful look. At 11:15 a.m., Sarah and I walked through the glass doors of Hartwell & Associates for the first time as owners. The reception area was impressive: marble floors, contemporary artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of the Chicago River. A young receptionist named Amanda looked up from her desk with a professional smile. "Good morning," she said. "How may I help you?" "We're here to see the senior staff," Sarah said. "We have a meeting scheduled with the management team." Amanda's expression shifted to one of nervous recognition. "Oh, you must be from North Star Holdings. Yes, Mr. Hartwell mentioned you'd be coming by. Let me call upstairs." Within minutes, David Chen, the CFO, appeared in the lobby along with 2 other senior partners. They all looked appropriately anxious about meeting their new owners for the first time. "Ms. Chen," David said, extending his hand to Sarah, "welcome to Hartwell & Associates. We're excited to meet with you and discuss the transition." "Thank you, David," Sarah replied. "Actually, I'd like to introduce you to someone. This is Nicole Anderson, the principal behind North Star Holdings." I stepped forward, extending my hand to David. "Please, call me Nick. I'm looking forward to working with all of you." The confusion on their faces was immediate and obvious. They'd been expecting some gray-haired corporate raider or faceless investment committee. Instead, they were looking at a 25-year-old woman who looked like she could be someone's younger sister. "Ms. Anderson," David said carefully, "forgive me, but we weren't expecting— you seem quite young to be running a company?" I finished with a smile. "I get that a lot. Don't worry, you'll get used to it." We spent the next hour in the main conference room, going over transition plans and organizational charts. I made it clear that I wanted to maintain stability in the short term, while evaluating opportunities for growth and improvement. The senior partners seemed cautiously optimistic, though I could see them stealing glances at each other when they thought I wasn't looking. "I'd like to meet with all the senior staff individually over the next few days," I said as the meeting wrapped up. "Starting with the vice presidents and senior vice presidents. Could you have them come in one by one this afternoon?" "Of course," David said. "Should I start with our most senior people?" "Actually," I said, consulting the organizational chart in front of me, "let's start with Marcus Anderson. I believe he's one of our youngest SVPs." The room went quiet. David looked confused. "Anderson? Are you related?" "He's my brother," I said simply, "but he doesn't know I'm here yet. I'd like to keep it that way until he walks into this room." The looks on their faces were priceless. I could practically see the gears turning in their heads as they tried to process this information. "Ms. Anderson," one of the senior partners said carefully, "are you sure that's wise? This kind of surprise could be disruptive to workplace dynamics." "I appreciate your concern," I replied, "but I think Marcus and I can handle our family dynamics. Could you have him come up at 2 o'clock? Don't tell him anything other than that the new owner wants to meet with him." At exactly 2 p.m., I was sitting alone in the conference room looking out at the city skyline. My heart was racing, but I felt more focused than I had in years. This was it, the moment I'd been building toward since that humiliating evening at my parents' house. There was a knock on the door, and Amanda's voice called out, "Mr. Anderson is here to see you." "Send him in," I called back. The door opened, and Marcus walked in wearing his typical confident smile. He was checking his phone as he entered, probably reviewing his talking points for what he assumed would be a standard meet and greet with a new corporate overlord. "Good afternoon," he said, looking up from his phone. "I'm Marcus Anderson, Senior Vice President of Technology Consulting. I'm excited to meet with you and discuss—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me sitting at the head of the conference table. His mouth actually fell open, and for a moment, he just stood there staring. "Hello, Marcus," I said calmly. "Please, have a seat." "Nick?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here? Are you working for the new owners?" "Not exactly," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "I am the new owner." Marcus laughed, but it was a nervous, uncertain sound. "Come on, Nick. This isn't funny. What are you really doing here?" I slid a copy of the acquisition documents across the table to him. "I'm completely serious, Marcus. As of this morning, I own 100% of Hartwell and Associates, which means I'm your new boss." He picked up the documents with shaking hands, scanning the pages with growing disbelief. I watched as his face went through a series of emotions: confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally, something that might have been anger. "This is impossible," he said finally. "You don't have this kind of money. You can't just buy a company like this." "Actually, I can," I said. And I did. $52 million to be exact. It turns out that all those years of playing around with computers were more profitable than anyone in our family realized. Marcus set the papers down and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Nick, what is this? Some kind of revenge? Are you trying to humiliate me?" "I'm trying to show all of you, that I'm not the family failure you think I am," I said. "I'm tired of being dismissed, tired of being patronized, tired of being treated like I'm waiting for my real life to begin." "But Nick," Marcus said, and I could hear the hurt in his voice, "I never thought you were a failure. None of us did. We wanted you to be secure, to have stability." "By working in your IT department?" I asked. "By getting an entry-level position through your connections?" "Marcus, while you were climbing the corporate ladder, I was building my own company. I've been successful for years, but nobody in our family ever bothered to ask about the details." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "So what happens now? Are you going to fire me? Make my life miserable?" "I'm going to run this company," I said, "and you're going to keep doing your job, because despite everything, you're actually good at what you do. But things are going to change around here, and you're going to have to get used to the fact that your little sister is the one in charge." "Nick," Marcus said quietly, "I don't know what Dad said at that party, but—" "Dad called you the smart one," I interrupted, "in front of the entire family. He said you were the one who'd always go places while treating my career like a hobby I'd eventually outgrow." Marcus winced. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize— I knew Dad could be insensitive, but I didn't think about how it affected you." "It affected me enough to buy your company," I said with a slight smile. "So I'd say the impact was pretty significant." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling between us. Finally, Marcus looked up at me with something that might have been respect. $52 million, he said softly. "Jesus, Nick. I had no idea you were operating at that level." "Most people don't," I said. "I've gotten very good at flying under the radar." Marcus stood up slowly, straightening his tie. "So, boss," he said, testing out the word, "what's my first assignment under new management?" I smiled. "Actually, I want you to call a staff meeting for tomorrow morning. I need to introduce myself to the entire company, and I think it would be appropriate for you to handle the introductions." "You want me to introduce my sister as the new CEO?" "I want you to introduce Nicole Anderson, owner and CEO of Hartwell and Associates, who happens to be your sister," I corrected. "There's a difference." Marcus nodded slowly. "I can do that. But Nick, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you going to tell Mom and Dad about this?" I leaned back in my chair, considering the question. "Eventually, but I think I'm going to let them figure it out on their own first. It should be interesting to see how long it takes." Marcus actually smiled at that. "You know they're going to lose their minds when they find out." "I'm counting on it," I said. "Now let's talk about how we're going to run this company." 3 weeks had passed since I'd revealed my identity to Marcus, and the transition at Hartwell and Associates was going smoother than I'd dared to hope. The staff had adapted to my leadership style, direct but fair, focused on results rather than politics. Marcus had proven to be an excellent bridge between the old guard and my vision for the company's future. More importantly, I'd discovered that owning a company was far more satisfying than I'd imagined. It wasn't just about the power or the vindication, though both were certainly gratifying. It was about being able to implement ideas, to push for innovation, to create the kind of workplace I'd always wanted to be part of. I was reviewing quarterly projections in my new corner office when Amanda buzzed me on the intercom. "Ms. Anderson, your mother is here to see you." My blood went cold. Mom was here? At my office? I glanced at my calendar, trying to figure out if I'd forgotten some family obligation, but there was nothing scheduled. "Did she say what this was about?" I asked. "No, ma'am. She just said she needed to speak with Nicole Anderson about her son's employment. Oh no. Somehow Mom had found out where I worked but didn't realize I owned the place. This was going to be complicated. Send her in, I said, quickly straightening my desk and trying to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. Mom walked into my office wearing her best meeting with important people outfit. A navy blue dress with her good pearls and the confident smile she reserved for parent-teacher conferences and conversations with bank managers. She looked around the spacious office, clearly impressed by the mahogany furniture and city views. "Ms. Anderson?" she said, extending her hand. "I'm Carol Anderson, Marcus's mother. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." I stood up and shook her hand, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Of course, Mrs. Anderson. Please, have a seat. What can I do for you?" Mom settled into the chair across from my desk, clutching her purse. "I hope you don't mind me coming by unannounced, but I wanted to talk to you about Marcus. He's been working here for over 2 years now, and he's always spoken so highly of the company." "Marcus is an excellent employee," I said carefully. "We value his contributions to the team." "That's wonderful to hear," Mom said, beaming with pride. "You know, Marcus has always been the smart one in our family. Ever since he was little, we knew he'd go places. He has such a head for business, such natural leadership qualities." There it was again, the same phrase that had started this entire journey. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach, but I kept my voice steady. "He's certainly talented," I agreed. "The thing is," Mom continued, "I have another child, a daughter, and I'm worried about her. She's been playing around with computers for years, thinking she can make a living out of it. I've tried to tell her that she needs a real job, something stable, but she won't listen to reason." I leaned forward slightly. "What kind of work does she do with computers?" "Oh, making little applications for phones, investing in cryptocurrencies, that sort of thing. It's not really a career, if you know what I mean. She calls herself an entrepreneur, but between you and me, I think she's just afraid of the real world." The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I was sitting in my own office in the company I'd purchased for $52 million, listening to my mother describe my career as playing around. "Mrs. Anderson," I said slowly. "What's your daughter's name?" "Nicole Anderson. She goes by Nick." Mom sighed heavily. "I was hoping. Well, I know it's presumptuous of me to ask, but I was wondering if there might be any entry-level positions here at Hartwell. Maybe something in your computer department? I thought if Marcus could put in a good word." I stared at my mother for a long moment, trying to process the surreal situation. She was literally asking me to give myself a job. "Mrs. Anderson," I said carefully, "does your daughter know you're here?" "Oh, goodness, no. She'd be mortified. She's very independent, very proud. But a mother worries, I just want her to have security, to build a real future for herself." "And you don't think what she's doing now is real?" Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Apps and websites? That's not a real business. Those are just hobbies that happen to make a little money. She needs to work for an established company, learn how real business operates." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. 3 weeks ago, this conversation would have devastated me. Now it was almost funny in its absurdity. "Mrs. Anderson," I said, turning back to face her, "I think you might be underestimating your daughter's accomplishments." "Oh, I don't mean to sound unsupportive," Mom said quickly. "I'm proud of her for trying. But let's be realistic. How much money can someone really make from phone apps?" "More than you might think," I said. "In fact, the app development industry is worth hundreds of billions of dollars globally. Some individual apps have generated revenues in the tens of millions." Mom looked skeptical. "Well, yes, I'm sure some people do well, but Nicole, she's always been more of a dreamer than a practical person. Not like Marcus." There was a knock on my door, and Amanda's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Anderson, your 3:30 appointment is here." I glanced at my calendar. Marcus and I had a standing weekly meeting to review department performance. Perfect timing. "Send him in," I said. The door opened, and Marcus walked in, carrying his usual folder of reports. He stopped short when he saw Mom sitting in my office. "Mom?" he said, looking confused. "What are you doing here?" "Marcus, honey." Mom stood up and hugged him. "I came to talk to Ms. Anderson about Nicole. I was hoping she might have a position available." Marcus looked at me over Mom's shoulder, his eyes wide with panic. I could see him trying to figure out how to handle this situation without revealing the truth. "Mom," Marcus said carefully, "I don't think that's necessary. Nick is doing fine on her own." "Nonsense," Mom said, turning back to me. "Ms. Anderson, this is my son Marcus, the one I was telling you about, and he's being too modest about his sister. She could really use some guidance from someone like you." I looked at Marcus, who was clearly struggling with whether to blow my cover. I gave him a slight nod. It was time. Mrs. Anderson, I said, returning to my desk and sitting down, I think there's something you should know about your daughter. Oh? Mom sat back down, looking concerned. She's not in some kind of trouble, is she? Not exactly, I said. Marcus, would you like to explain, or should I? Marcus took a deep breath. Mom, I need to tell you something. Nick, she doesn't need a job here. Why not? Mom asked, looking between us. Because, Marcus said, glancing at me for confirmation, she owns this company. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning realization. I'm sorry, she said slowly. Could you repeat that? Mom, I said, speaking for the first time since Marcus's revelation, meet Nicole Anderson, owner and CEO of Hartwell & Associates. Mom's eyes darted between Marcus and me, trying to process what she was hearing. Nicole? But this is impossible. I bought the company 3 weeks ago for $52 million, I said matter-of-factly. Those phone apps you mentioned? They generated enough revenue to fund the acquisition, along with my other investments. Mom sat in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. $52 million? Plus performance bonuses, I confirmed. It turns out that playing around with computers was more lucrative than anyone in our family realized. But why didn't you tell us? Mom asked, her voice breaking slightly. Why did you let us think? Because you never asked, I said, not unkindly. For years, every family gathering was about Marcus's achievements and my need to find a real job. And no one ever asked about the details of what I was doing or how successful it was. Marcus cleared his throat. Mom, Nick has been trying to tell us about her success for years. We just weren't listening. I listened, Mom protested weakly. You listened to what you wanted to hear? I said. You heard computer stuff and assumed it wasn't important. You heard entrepreneur and thought it meant I was unemployed. Mom put her hand to her forehead, looking overwhelmed. Nicole, honey, I don't know what to say. I had no idea. I know you didn't, I said, coming around the desk to sit in the chair next to her. And I know you were trying to help. But Mom, I need you to understand something. I don't need security or stability from someone else's company. I create my own security. $52 million, Mom repeated, as if saying it would make it more real. The purchase price, I clarified. The company's value is actually higher than that. And my personal net worth is, well, let's just say it's sufficient. Marcus smiled slightly. Mom, your daughter is probably one of the most successful entrepreneurs in Chicago. She just doesn't brag about it. Mom looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between awe and regret. Nicole, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry we didn't see what you were accomplishing. I'm sorry we made you feel like you needed to prove yourself. I'm not sorry I proved myself, I said. But I am sorry it took buying Marcus's company to get your attention. Mom actually laughed at that, though there were tears in her eyes. You bought your brother's company to prove a point? Among other reasons, I said. It was also a sound investment. Your father is going to have a heart attack when he finds out, Mom said. Probably, I agreed. But maybe next time he'll think twice before announcing who the smart one in the family is. Mom reached over and took my hand. Nicole, honey, we always knew you were smart. We worried about you. We wanted you to have the kind of success we could understand. I have exactly the kind of success I wanted, I said. And now you understand it too. Marcus spoke up from where he'd been quietly observing our conversation. For what it's worth, Mom, working for Nick has been the best career experience I've ever had. She's transformed this company in just 3 weeks. Really? Mom asked, looking at me with new eyes. Really? Marcus confirmed. She's brilliant at this. We're already seeing improvements in efficiency, employee satisfaction, and client retention. I'm proud of both of you, Mom said finally. Marcus, for being professional enough to work for your sister. And Nicole, I'm proud of you for building something extraordinary, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. As Mom prepared to leave, she turned back to me one last time. Nicole, can I ask you something? Sure. Are you happy? Really happy? Not just successful, but fulfilled? I thought about the question for a moment. 3 weeks ago, I might have said I was successful, but not truly happy. There had been too much anger, too much need for validation. But now, sitting in my own office, having proven my point without destroying the relationships that mattered to me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Yes, Mom, I said. I'm happy. After Mom left, Marcus and I sat in my office, both processing what had just happened. That went better than I expected, Marcus said finally. Did it? I asked. I'm still trying to figure out if I should feel vindicated or guilty. Feel vindicated, Marcus said firmly. You earned this, Nick. All of it. And for what it's worth, I think you're going to be an amazing CEO. Even though your little sister is now your boss, Marcus smiled. Especially because my little sister is now my boss. Turns out Dad was wrong. You're the smart one, Nick. You always have been. I looked out at the Chicago skyline, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. It had started with hurt feelings and a desire for revenge, but it had evolved into something much more meaningful. The realization that I didn't need anyone else's validation to know my worth. Marcus, I said, want to help me plan a family dinner? I think it's time Dad met his daughter's new business empire. Marcus laughed. This is going to be the best family dinner in Anderson history. As the sun set over Chicago, I sat in my office. My company, my achievement, my proof that sometimes the family underdog turns out to be the one who changes everything. The smart one, indeed.